You have to teach your body that it can trust you. And you do that by honoring the hunger when it comes. But it's very fucking difficult. Welcome to this week's episode of the Uncovery podcast. My name is Maddie and I'm recovering from anorexia and I talk about it on this podcast. Today, in very exciting news, I'm having a coffee that I bought out, which I don't do very often. I make my own a lot. And so when I bought it, I will say I had a little bit of sticker shock because I think we used to joke about like $5 coffees at some point. Where it's like, oh my God, I would never spend $5 to buy a coffee. With tip, the total of this was $7.50. And my friends, this is not a large. This is very little. It's a cappuccino with oat milk. But I was treating myself when I was out for a little walk this morning because I woke up very grumpy. Today. I don't know if these things always have a cause. I didn't have one that I could really identify. You know, a lot of the time for me, if I wake up and my morning feels it's because I feel icky about my body. That's usually the culprit for me these days, where I'm just like, I don't feel good about myself. I don't like how I look or how I feel right off the top. And it can set me up to have that tone permeate throughout my day. And I think I've always been a little bit like this, where when something sort of goes wrong or something doesn't feel good, I have a hard time pulling myself back from it. You know, those nights out, for example, you go out and you're having a good time and then something happens and it's usually like, I don't know, someone's mad at somebody or somebody's having a bad night about a boy, or I'm just using this as an example. And then you're upset and you're mad. And then it's like, oh, come on, like we can still turn this night around. I've never really been a person that if I'm upset that I can turn it back around and really have fun again. I don't know. But so this morning I felt this way and I was like, what am I going to do? I don't like this. I have a bunch of stuff that I'm, doing tonight. I have some fun things with some different friends and I didn't want it to disastrously impact the rest of my day, where I just kind of give up on the day, cancel everything and just say, okay, well, it's like, we'll just try again tomorrow. That was what I wanted to do. But I was like, okay, instead, what are the things that I can do instead? And so I basically forced myself to go on a walk. And I've really been enjoying going for walks lately because it's fall and everything is so beautiful. And I thought, okay, maybe there's a chance. But I really had to drag myself out the door. I was like, I really don't feel like doing anything. Merp, merp, merp. I'm not going to record my podcast today. Merp, merp, merp. So I go outside and I go for a walk. And here are the very scientifically tested things that I did that I would recommend if you wake up grumpy. One is go outside, get some sunshine, get some air. Number 2, smile at all of the doggies that you encounter on your walk. And let me tell you, a Saturday morning in the fall when it's this beautiful, everyone is out with their doggies. So if you don't have a doggie, go and encounter all of the ones that you can. All of that fluff love will just turn your life around. Okay, so that's number 2. And number 3 is eat a banana. I heard this back, I think in junior high, from like a very old best friend of mine, that bananas make you happy. She used to say this. I think it's true. I'm sure it's true. There's something in bananas, apparently, I guess, that makes you happy. It's probably the carbohydrates because like that just always turns my mood around. But have a banana. And I don't mean half a banana. I was thinking about this morning. I'm like, look, all of you who are eating half a banana and leaving it and not eating a whole banana, sociopaths. Like, absolutely no more of this. We cannot do this anymore. No more half bananas. Eat the whole banana. This is coming from someone who has been afraid of bananas for a decade. Okay? Afraid of bananas. Let that sink in. We do not need to eat half a banana anymore. You can have the whole banana. I promise you it will be okay. And indeed, it might just turn your morning mood around. Bonus, crunchy leaves in the fall. Like chef's kiss, perfect combination. I can't even tell you how different I feel right now to when I woke up. And I think the realization of this, the realization of this, that you can actually turn your mood around and that you are not subject to the anchored position that you wake up in or that you find yourself in. This feels phenomenal to me. This feels revolutionary. And I'm not saying that it will always work, but I'm saying that I just very scientifically tested these solutions, and so far 100% success rate of this particular combination. So give that a try. And so then I got a coffee on the way back as like a bonus round, because I'm like, look, let's just ride this wave. Let's throw the whole kitchen sink at the grumpy and see if we can turn this around. And it seems to have been a success. So $7.50 coffee. That's fine. It's fine. That's fine. It's fine. Okay. Today, I want to talk about crazy shit that happens in recovery, because we talk a lot about all of the crazy detrimental shit that happens to you when you have an eating disorder and you kind of fall into an eating disorder. I don't know that we talk or hear a lot about what happens when you are coming back from it and in recovery from it, and the things that happen mentally, physically, and God knows this will probably need a part 2, because I'm only going to be speaking from obviously my own experience and some things that I know of that maybe I haven't directly experienced, but know that others have. But I'm also positive that I will continue to encounter new crazy shit on the rest of this sort of little journey. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different categories of this. I'm going to kind of try to categorize them into sort of the behavioral / mental side and then the physical side. Although in some cases, which I'll talk about, it's difficult to tell which is which, because these systems are so intertwined, right? The way that we feel really manifests physically. Things can really impact our mentality. So obviously this is going to be a Venn diagram, which is my favorite way to chart any concept, but I'm going to try to at least categorize them in these 2 different ways. Okay, so I'm going to do the behavioral kind of mental stuff first. And this first one it's like got a little tinge of eating disorder-y type stuff, because it can happen during the eating disorder too. But I also notice it in recovery in a slightly different way. And this is eating to please others. So I am finding that if I'm out or if I'm with people and I'm not hungry, or it's not necessarily a mealtime, or whatever reason that I'm not necessarily wanting or needing to eat, I now have this conscious feeling that, oh, well, I should, so that no one thinks that I'm restricting, like that I should be eating at all times. And especially when other people are eating, because otherwise it will look like a symptom of the eating disorder. And so eating to please others is sort of this thing where you're performing it almost to keep other people's worries at bay. I mean, obviously this is probably not helpful if you do that, but it's something that I've noticed, that I have this inclination to be like, don't worry everyone, I am eating, which is the same sort of thing that you do during the eating disorder, which is, oh, don't worry, look, yeah, no, I totally eat, I eat. And then you eat in front of others so that they don't think that you have an eating disorder or that you're not restricted anymore. I don't know. So that's one. The other is sort of continuing this thing where you are almost seeking permission to eat. So this is almost the opposite, I guess, but it's really, really difficult to get over this part. So when you're in recovery, a lot of times you're still really seeking that validation of needing permission to eat, whether it's other people also eating at the same time, or someone saying, here, try this, or whatever it is. So that's another one. Okay, another one is a feeling of anger at normal things that normal people do. Because people without eating disorders can exercise without it being compulsive, they can eat salads without that being part of an eating disorder. They're eating at certain times or snacking at certain times or not eating at certain times. But if it's making you entirely angry, I think that's really normal as a part of recovery, or at least that's been my experience of it. Definitely more so in the past. And when I was kind of refeeding the first time, I was livid all of the time when other people were doing things that were in regards to food and exercise. But that's part of recovery, is seeing how other people behave, how people live, and staying in your own lane and being like, my body and my life has nothing to do with the choices that other people are making for themselves. Okay. Another one is a fear of losing weight. This feels super counterintuitive to having an eating disorder, but when you're in recovery and you're feeling like you really actually want to recover and that you want to get rid of the eating disorder, there's this real fear of slipping backwards or losing the momentum of your recovery or moving backwards. It's so sticky because so much of you still kind of misses or craves or has nostalgia for a previous state of your body or your life, but knowing that you actually really do want to push forward and knowing that if you lose weight, it's an extraordinarily slippery slope. It's not as easy as just, a normal person kind of weight fluctuates up and down here and there. For a person that has a history of an eating disorder, losing weight is such a trigger point to go all the way back down the mountain. So that's one as well. I also think that I've been feeling more alone in the recovery process lately. Despite the fact that I've been energetic enough to go out and be much more social and do much more things, there's a loneliness that comes with the middle of recovery where people... It's because you're not near death anymore. It's because things aren't severe anymore. And so people sort of lift a little bit off of the hovering. You know what I mean? Like they're not hovering so much. They're kind of away. And so there's this real acceptance of being with yourself and being the support that you need and being your own only support. And I think that's good because we all have to learn to cope without having, everybody hovering around you. And, when you're in that period where everybody's hovering around you, you actually feel very suffocated. So it's kind of like you can't really win. But yeah, you definitely feel a little bit more alone. That's something that I've noticed. Okay. Those were sort of like the mental ones. I don't know if that's like crazy shit or not, but it's stuff that I've been noticing. The physical stuff is what I think is the craziest shit. This stuff is way crazier, at least to me. And I mean, I'm sure that in some regard, a lot of this stuff feels like oversharing, or the things that I go through feel like oversharing. Like, wow, that's a lot. But I also feel that people don't understand that other people go through this. And I've only really discovered through sharing this that other people go through some similar things. Or like, in group therapy or things like that, where you meet other people that have had eating disorders or have eating disorders. And you're like, oh, you too, because you feel like you were the only one going through some of this stuff. And the physical symptoms, that can be very kind of shamey and isolating. And so whatever, I'm just going to talk about crazy things because here we are. I have not been through this one, the first one, and I'm going to kind of gloss over it. We've talked about it in other episodes, but refeeding syndrome, when you first go into recovery, and let's say that you're in a very, very malnourished state, if you go too quickly into bringing up the amount of food and bringing up the amount of nutrition, you can actually destabilize a lot of the systems in your body, and it can kill you. It can actually, totally have detrimental consequences. So refeeding syndrome, because your body cannot bounce back that quickly and cope with the amount of change that it undergoes that rapidly. So you have to be under medical supervision at that beginning piece. If you're at a very, very dangerously low weight and refeeding, that can happen. So medical professionals are very important at the beginning of recovery. But that's a physical crazy shit that happens in recovery. The next one, this one I've completely noticed, taste buds change completely. So at the beginning, or when you're really in your eating disorder, you're trying to create some semblance of flavor out of food or food substitutes, basically, that don't taste like real food, So as you kind of go through recovery, you'll notice that you crave different tastes or things that you used to think tasted fine taste terrible. Like all those like diety chemical foods, I can now taste the chemicals in a way that I couldn't before, because now I think my taste buds are getting used to normal food. And so now I would like taste some of these things that were sort of in the back of the fridge I hadn't used in forever. I'm like, oh yeah, try them. It tastes literally terrible. I'm not even gonna mention brand names because it's not helpful to anybody, but like all of these chemical laden, sugar-free nonsense, like pretend zero foods, they do not actually taste like food. They don't, especially when you get further along. Okay. Thirst. I used to find myself very thirsty all of the time or craving liquids all of the time because I was so patterned in replacing food with drink, replacing food with water. And if you just drink more and more and more and more, your body gets used to that, right? It adapts. And so then when you start to ease back on that because you're having food instead of just constantly having fluids, you feel really thirsty at the beginning of that until you sort of normalize and stabilize between like what a normal level of hydration is, that you're not just overdoing it all of the time. Okay, this one has been the most annoying to me, both the first time that I sort of was recovering and this time, and that is night sweats. So I have had this, it is, I feel like a menopausal like crazy person. I don't know, but I've woken up just drenched in the past, and it hasn't been as bad this time as it was the first time that I sort of was refeeding. I'm not exactly sure why. My feeling and what I've heard from other people that have had eating disorders and people that are sort of in the eating disorder sphere is that this has to do with your metabolism coming back online, number one. So your body has to process a bunch more food. It's working in overdrive. So you're sleeping, you're laying down, whatever. You're not exerting that any other way. And you're digesting this food. Your body's like firing on all cylinders. So you're sweating because basically you're working very hard as you're sleeping, or your body's working very hard. That's part of it. Hormonal changes, I think, is possibly another explanation for some of that, as your body's kind of rebalancing those. And then another is that depending on what it is that you're eating, your blood sugar can fluctuate quite a bit. So if your blood sugar hits a low after being high, that can cause you to have night sweats as well. That was something that my doctor kind of suggested to me. So, but it is such a pain in the ass and it is crazy. So having to like change your pajamas or whatever, it is like waking up in the night it is a nightmare. It is starting to like, it's definitely not happening so much anymore. And I noticed this before when I've gained weight, where when I get to a place that my body's happier, it doesn't happen anymore. So it's almost like it balances itself out. Imagine. Another crazy thing that happens in recovery is you actually can lose hair. So people kind of think of having an eating disorder and losing your hair because of malnutrition, and that definitely does happen. But I did at one point experience in early recovery, it's almost like a changeover. So your body's almost like getting rid of the unhealthy hair or something like that. I have no idea the science behind this. I have no idea. Don't quote me. But it can happen in recovery that your hair like starts to like continues to shed in the early days and then sort of gets healthier and replenishes itself. I have talked about exhaustion as I've gone through this at length. I have talked about this a lot. I probably do not need to belabor this point, but the irony of being way more tired as you're eating more food and getting more energy is very destabilizing when you're in recovery. You're like, when will this end? When will I actually have this boost of energy from all of this food? It takes time, especially early recovery. It is so depleting. Like you're catatonic, you're so tired. So that is completely normal, but it feels crazy. Okay, here's one. Here's a couple. So my feet grow in recovery and they shrink when I am underweight or undernourished. That is something I have never actually heard of. I've never really talked to anybody else about this, so I don't know if this is something that anybody else has gone through, but I definitely remember that when I've been at very kind of low points and I've put on some shoes that I haven't worn in a while, right? Like some heels to go to work, whatever, and I need to put in an insole because my feet have sort of just shrunk. I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't think the actual size of the foot maybe has completely shrunk. Maybe it's just sort of everything is just, I don't know, deflated. Like your whole body is basically like sunken in and deflated. So I guess why should your feet be any different? But I do remember being really freaked out by the fact that like I was then like falling out of my shoes at one point. And then as you sort of introduce better and more nutrition and you start to gain weight, your feet they grow back. So that's crazy. That one was crazy to me when I noticed that. I was like, what the hell is happening? Why are my feet growing? I am old. They shouldn't be growing anymore. To that end, getting taller, I'm convinced that I am taller than when I was at my lowest point. So I'm just going to say that I'm taller. I feel taller. I'm pretty sure I got taller. Because I think that maybe it's just that my pants have more to go around so that they're shorter. I might have to check this one. I might have to fact check this one. But I feel like I grew taller. And it makes sense, right? Like everything should grow. That makes sense to me. Okay. Adult acne is another fun one that happens. I think this probably just mostly has to do with hormones and your body coming back online in all of your systems and your skin coming back alive, which means that it's more active. And then if you are a person that is prone to acne, your skin can just go crazy. It's an indicator for me, and it has been in the past, where I know that I'm like renourishing. Your skin it looks more alive, certainly. And that's ideal, right? That's great. You look all glowy and much better than when you're kind of, I don't know, sallow and sad looking. But it comes with nice little breakouts, often around the sort of hormonal areas of your face. That's a fun one. And I'm not saying all of this to dissuade anybody from recovering. Obviously, all of these sort of weird or crazy things that sort of happen, they're probably going to end, right? Like it's a period of time in recovery that they happen, and then they sort of resolve themselves when you balance out. But also it's a small price to pay for the life that you get back in recovery, right? So this is not like, oh, don't bother recovering because this crazy shit's going to happen to you. It's like, no, these are very real things that you can expect to happen. And then you won't feel so terrified or petrified or alone when and if they do. And if that's an experience that you have. So yeah, I should have said that at the beginning. Don't let any of this stop you from recovering. It's very much worth it so far as I can tell. And I'm like, okay, we just got to keep going. But the gastrointestinal system, if that takes a while for it to resolve itself and get used to eating food and get used to digesting food, like you get a lot of bloating, you get a lot of discomfort. Nausea is quite common when you're eating food again and eating new foods because your body's not used to it. There's something called gastroparesis, which is actually just your stomach doesn't move in order to digest the food at a rapid rate. So it feels like your stomach just like is not moving food through your system. Sometimes you need medication for that. Sometimes it can kind of just resolve on its own. But that's something that definitely happens. Swelling, water retention, something that we see almost more frequently, I think, with things like bulimia or with purging, where imbalancing your electrolytes in that way can cause a lot of things like swelling and water retention when it sort of bounces back. But I've experienced this as well, where like my joints feel swollen, like my legs feel swollen. And part of that is just the first period of time, especially when you're in recovery, the fluid in your tissues between your cells and your glycogen stores and your liver and your muscles, that's all being replenished after a time where it hasn't been. And, we've all kind of heard the thing that you hold water because it holds on to things like when you eat carbohydrates because of that glycogen. And that's true to some extent. You're basically replenishing all of your systems and all of your cells. And part of that is this water retention that regulates and sort of balances out over time. But it is very, very concerning for the person who is experiencing it when it's happening, because it just feels like you're just gaining all of this weight so rapidly, and it really messes with your body dysmorphia, especially because some of that is bound to go to areas that you're more uncomfortable with. For example, your tummy. right? It feels like you're just everything is going there, that you're gaining all of this weight, and that all the water retention and bloating is all happening in the same place, which is probably a place that you just weren't crazy about to begin with. Otherwise, you wouldn't be noticing it so much. So that's something that is completely normal and very uncomfortable. And knocking on wood, it will pass. Another thing that I've experienced that's been very strange during recovery has been the inability to regulate my body temperature. These huge swings from being way, 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 way warm and like feeling sweaty and then kind of crashing into this, oh, now I'm freezing cold. And, when you're in sort of the eating disorder, if you are like restricting and you're malnourished, you get really cold all the time. I've lived like just a decade of being freezing all of the time. And it's only been recently that I'm like outside in just a shirt or even a sweater. And it's like, oh, are you cold? It's kind of cold. I'm like, I am not cold. I am actually fine. I am more insulated. But until you've kind of reached a balanced period, I was having these huge swings where after I would eat, I would get really hot. And then later on, it was almost like an indicator of when I needed to eat because I'd get cold again. But yeah, so that's something, regulating your body temperature. Now, a couple that are, I would say, sort of these middle of the Venn diagram ones. One is night eating. And I have had this before where I would wake up in the night, and it's not sort of the night eating disorder that when people fully pretty much stay asleep or unconscious while they're doing it and only realize in the morning when they're awake and conscious that they've done it. That's a different thing. This was waking up and thinking about food and just going and having a snack in the middle of the night or eating something or whatever it is. I don't do this anymore, but there have been periods at the kind of earliest stages or earlier stages of recovery where my body just, I guess, was like, wake up, you need more food than you're getting. You're not there yet. So we're still hungry. It's very emotionally taxing because it feels very wrong. It feels like you are gluttonous, that nobody eats in the middle of the night. Like this is a problem. But the truth is until you're properly nourishing yourself, your body is going to call out for more. And part of that is going to be at all times of the day and night. And learning to honor that is very, very difficult. Trusting that will go away and that you will be able to sleep through the night again, that you'll be eating enough in the day and evening that you won't need that midnight snack, literally, but honoring it as best you can without it really freaking you out. That's really hard. The last one, which is one that definitely combines the mental and the physical, is extreme hunger. And it's this feeling of being overwhelmed with hunger and feeling like you just want to eat more and more and more and more. Because you've had this extended period of either mental or physical restriction, we've completely abandoned our hunger cues. We've ignored our growling tummies. We've pretended that we don't feel cold and shaky. And we've just basically convinced ourselves that we don't need food. So when we sort of reintroduce food again, it's possible that you can think of this evolutionarily. Your brain is like, oh, there's food available again. I'm going to eat all of it because who knows when I will have it again. And so there's this physical element of extreme hunger where you feel like a bottomless pit. And I had read about this and I had seen all of this messaging about like, you have to honor that extreme hunger and like, it's okay. It's just part of recovery. We know how scary that is, but you just got to go through it. Don't worry. Like just, honor it, honor it, honor it. And I didn't really experience this at the beginning of recovery, which is when I thought you would expect to experience that, right? So when you first do it, when you're still potentially very undernourished or still have quite a restrictive mindset, that it would happen at the beginning then. But I didn't. I really didn't experience that extreme hunger. It wasn't until later, so more recently for me, that I would have these days where I was like, I am a bottomless pit and I am never going to stop eating. And what is happening to me? And all of that wisdom, all of those posts, all of those things that I had read, like honor it, honor it, honor it. it really mentally goes out the window when you're experiencing it, because it feels, again, so wrong. It feels like you should have a break from eating. You should not be eating all throughout the day. Like you have to stop. You are losing control. That's the mentality part. But you think about that and you think about how not only have you been maybe physically restricting, but you've been mentally restricting entire food groups, right? The choices that you've made about food over the years, the things that you have denied yourself. Now, all of a sudden your brain is like, I want those things. I want those things. So there's a mental element to extreme hunger, and it feels crazy. It feels crazy when it's happening. And I didn't think that it was an experience that anybody else had in later stages of recovery or middle stages of recovery. So I was happy to read, the experiences of some other people that were like, it wasn't until much later in my recovery, like after being weight restored, that extreme hunger sort of came. So I didn't know that, and it helped me a lot to know that somebody else had gone through it at a quote unquote weird or unexpected time in recovery. But yeah, that one's a really, that one will test your recovery resolve immensely, because giving in to what your body's actually asking for or what your brain is asking for and practicing honoring that, like that's a real test. So if that's something that you are going through, whether or not you've had an eating disorder or not, and I will say that because sometimes your body's just going to be hungrier on some days. Sometimes you're just going to need more food. Sometimes your brain is just going to feel like it wants something, even if it's for comfort. Those are things that are normal. Those are things that will happen. And you're not just going to continue eating until you explode, right? I think about like dogs, right? Like some dogs you can leave food out and they will just sort of eat when they're hungry, and they will stop when they don't want anymore. And they're what we would call an intuitive eater. And then there are dogs like my dog who, if you left out unlimited food, he would eat until he died. He would eat until he exploded. That is a very real thing that he would probably do. And that's not the case with humans. Like, you're not just going to eat until you explode. Like, we have these different regulators. And once our bodies feel safe and feel that they can trust us again, then they won't be crying out for more and more and more. But you have to teach your body that it can trust you. And you do that by honoring the hunger when it comes. But it's very fucking difficult. It's really, really hard not to freak out when you're going through that. So that's kind of some of the crazier shit that has happened so far in recovery. The only way out is through, is what I am learning. For some of these things to have resolved themselves, and lots of these for me they were temporary. And I believe that all of them will be temporary. But the only way for it to be temporary is to keep going, which is much easier said than done, but it truly is the only way. So hopefully this validates, some other people that have gone through this, or at least gives a little bit more insight to people without eating disorders that this is the stuff that kind of goes on behind the scenes. If you're not actively living with somebody that has an eating disorder and you see this kind of stuff firsthand, or they're not telling you about it, like, there is so much that goes on while you're in recovery, and it's very normal. It doesn't feel normal. It feels crazy, but it will resolve. And yeah, it just gives maybe a little bit of a peek inside what the actual experience of recovery is. And I'm sure we will need a part 2 to this, because I'm sure I'm in for some more crazy shit and along this whole little journey, this whole very big journey, I guess. But that's today's episode. Check out Apple Podcasts or Spotify to leave us a rating. We love that. And shoot us any questions, or let me know any crazy shit that you have experienced in your own uncovery or recovery, whatever that might be. And we will see you on the next episode.